The knock came at midnight. 3 sharp raps that cut through the silence like gunshots. And Adelaide Shaw's hand froze on the needle she'd been threading by lamplight in her isolated homestead, 15 miles north of Jordan Valley, Oregon. She lived alone out here in the high desert country where sage and juniper stretched endlessly under vast skies, where the nearest neighbor was 8 miles east, and the town itself might as well have been on the moon for all the company she kept. Her father had built this cabin in 1873, back when he'd believed a man could carve out a decent living ranching cattle on the unforgiving land, before the harsh winter of 1880 had taken him along with most of his herd. Now, in the spring of 1884, Adelaide was 23 years old and had learned to survive on her own through sheer stubbornness and careful planning, selling eggs and vegetables to the occasional traveler, and doing needlework for the families in town when she made the long journey there once a month. She set down her sewing and reached for the shotgun she kept loaded by the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. Nobody came out this far, not unless they were lost or running from something. The isolation that usually felt like protection now seemed suddenly vulnerable. "Who's there?" She called out, keeping her voice steady though her palms had gone damp. "Madam, I need help." The voice was male, rough with exhaustion and something else, pain maybe. "Please, I know it's late, but I'm in a bad way." Adelaide moved to the window and pulled back the flour sack curtain just enough to see out into the darkness. The moon was 3/4 full, bright enough to illuminate the figure slumped against her porch post. He was tall, that much she could tell, wearing a long duster coat dark with what might have been dust or blood. His hat hung low, shadowing his face. "State your business," she said through the door, the shotgun heavy in her hands. "I'm hurt. Been riding for 2 days straight. Horse gave out about a mile back. Saw your light and figured it was my only chance." He coughed, a wet sound that made Adelaide wince. "I can pay you for your trouble. Just need a place to rest for a few hours, maybe some water." Everything in Adelaide's careful nature screamed at her to send him away, to keep the door barred and wait until morning to fire a warning shot if he was still there. But she'd been raised by a father who believed in basic human decency, and she'd inherited enough of his compassion to make her hesitate. Out here, if someone was truly hurt, turning them away could be a death sentence. "You armed?" she asked. "Yes, madam, but I'm not looking for trouble." "You can keep my guns if it makes you feel safer." Adelaide took a deep breath and made her decision, hoping it wouldn't be the last one she ever made. She opened the door but kept the shotgun leveled at him. "Take your weapons out slowly and set them on the porch, all of them." The man moved with obvious pain, reaching slowly into his coat and pulling out a Colt revolver, then another from his belt. He set them down carefully, then added a knife from his boot. "That's all of them. Step into the light where I can see you." He straightened up with a grunt and moved closer to the lamp she'd hung by the door. Adelaide felt her breath catch. He was young, maybe 25 or 26, with a face that might have been handsome if it weren't drawn tight with pain and exhaustion. Dark hair fell past his collar, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, pale green in the lamplight, holding a mixture of desperation and something that looked almost like resignation. His shirt was torn and stained dark down his left side, and now she could see the way he held that arm tucked close to his body. "You've been shot," she said, not a question. "Yes, madam. 3 days ago, over near the Nevada border. I've been trying to keep it clean, but I think it's getting infected." Adelaide studied him for another long moment, weighing risk against conscience. Finally, she stepped back. "Come in. But try anything and I'll shoot you dead. I'm a good shot, and at this range I won't miss." "Understood, madam." "Thank you." He stumbled through the doorway, and she caught a better look at him in the cabin's light. He was indeed tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, rangy build of someone who spent their life in the saddle. The blood on his shirt was definitely fresher than 3 days old, which meant the wound was still bleeding. "Sit there," she gestured to one of the chairs at her small table. "Don't move while I bar the door." He sank into the chair like a man who'd been holding himself upright through sheer will alone. Adelaide secured the door, then kept the shotgun within easy reach as she moved to build up the fire and heat water. "What's your name?" she asked, gathering clean rags and the medical supplies she kept in a wooden box. He hesitated, just long enough that she knew whatever he told her might not be the truth. Gideon Fuller." "Well, Gideon Fuller, I'm Adelaide Shaw. And you're going to tell me who shot you and why, because I need to know if I should expect company." His jaw tightened. "You won't get company out here. That's why I came this direction. Nobody follows someone into this kind of nowhere." "Bounty hunters don't come this far," she said, watching his reaction carefully. She saw it, the slight flinch, the way his eyes darted away from hers. Her stomach sank. "You're wanted." "Madam, I can explain how much," she interrupted. "How much is the price on your head?" Gideon met her eyes then, and she saw something in them that surprised her. Honesty. Raw, painful honesty. $500, dead or alive. Adelaide felt her knees go weak. $500 was a fortune, enough to keep her homestead running for years, enough to buy breeding stock and seed and everything she needed. And here he sat in her cabin, wounded and weaponless. For what crime? Murder. The word fell between them like a stone down a well. "But I didn't do it. I know that's what every wanted man says, but it's the truth. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and the man who actually did it was the son of a rich cattle baron over in Nevada. They needed someone to hang, and I was convenient. She should throw him out. She should tie him up and ride to Jordan Valley at first light, turn him in, claim that reward money. It would be the smart thing, the safe thing. But Adelaide had learned to read people in her 23 years, had to in order to survive out here with the few travelers who passed through. And what she read in Gideon Fuller's face wasn't the hardness of a killer, but the desperation of a hunted man. "Let me see the wound," she said finally. Relief washed over his features so completely that she knew she'd made the right choice, or at least a choice she could live with. He started to shrug out of his coat, and she moved to help him, careful of the injured arm. His shirt was crusted with dried blood and stuck to the wound. She had to cut it away with scissors, and even with gentle hands, she couldn't prevent him from hissing in pain. The bullet wound was high on his left shoulder, just below the collarbone. The entry wound was angry and inflamed, oozing a mixture of blood and pus that told her infection had indeed set in. But when she carefully turned him to look at his back, she saw clean flesh, no exit wound. "The bullet's still in there," she said. "It needs to come out." Gideon's face had gone pale. "I know. I was hoping I could make it to California, find a doctor there, but the infection's caught up with me. I can try to get it out, but I'm not a doctor. I've dug bullets out of livestock before, patched up my father after accidents, but this will hurt and I might do more harm than good. I'll die if it stays in." He looked at her steadily. "I trust you, Miss Shaw." Those words, spoken with such simple faith, settled something in Adelaide's chest. She nodded and went to gather what she'd need. Her father's whiskey, kept for medicinal purposes. A thin knife sterilized in the fire. More clean rags. She made Gideon drink several long swallows of the whiskey, then gave him a leather strap to bite down on. "This is going to be bad," she warned him. He nodded, already bracing himself. Adelaide had never considered herself squeamish, but digging a bullet out of a living man while he struggled not to scream tested the limits of her composure. She worked as quickly as she dared, following the wound channel with the knife tip, feeling for the hard resistance of metal. Sweat poured down Gideon's face and his whole body shook with the effort of holding still. Finally, blessedly, she felt the blade scrape against something solid. Using the knife and her fingers, she worked the flattened bullet free and dropped it into a bowl with a clink that seemed impossibly loud. Gideon had passed out at some point, which she counted as a mercy. She cleaned the wound thoroughly with whiskey, packed it with clean cloth and bandaged it as tightly as she dared. Then she checked his breathing and pulse. Both steady, if a bit fast. The worst was over, at least for now. She couldn't leave him at the table, so she half-dragged, half-carried him to her bed, the only one in the cabin. He was heavy as sin and twice as awkward, but she managed to get him settled. She'd sleep in her father's old chair by the fire. It wouldn't be the first time. The night passed slowly. Adelaide dozed more than slept, jerking awake at every sound, half expecting to see bounty hunters breaking down her door or Gideon standing over her with ill intent. But he never stirred, and no riders came. When dawn finally broke over the high desert in shades of pink and gold, she found herself watching him in the growing light, in sleep. The hard lines of pain and desperation had eased from his face. He looked younger, almost peaceful. Dark lashes lay against his cheeks, and his breathing had deepened into the regular rhythm of true rest. She noticed things she hadn't in the chaos of the night before. The slight crook in his nose that suggested it had been broken at least once, the small scar through his left eyebrow, the way his hair curled slightly at his collar. Adelaide shook herself and stood up, joints protesting after a night in the chair. She had chickens to feed and a garden to tend, and a stranger in her bed didn't change those basic necessities. She moved quietly, trying not to wake him. He needed rest more than anything now. The morning chores grounded her, the familiar routine settling her nerves. She gathered eggs, fed the chickens and her milk cow, checked on the small vegetable garden she was coaxing from the stubborn soil. The day promised to be warm, the kind of perfect spring day that made the harsh winters almost seem worthwhile. Almost. When she came back inside with fresh eggs and a pail of milk, Gideon was awake, propped up on one elbow and looking around the cabin with the wary alertness of a man used to trouble. "Easy," she said. "You're safe here. How do you feel?" He touched his bandaged shoulder carefully. "Like I've been shot and had the bullet dug out without laudanum, but better than yesterday." He met her eyes. "Thank you. You probably saved my life." Adelaide set down the eggs and milk, suddenly aware of how small her cabin was, how intimate it felt to have this man in her space. "You should eat something. Keep your strength up. The wound will need to be cleaned and rebandaged later. I don't want to impose on you any more than I already have. If you could spare some food and water, I'll be on my way." "On your way where? You said your horse gave out." "You can't walk to California, and you're in no condition to travel anyway. That infection could come back if you don't rest and let yourself heal." Gideon's expression turned troubled. "Miss Shaw, I appreciate everything you've done, but keeping me here puts you in danger. If anyone finds out you're harboring me, you could be charged as an accomplice. I won't do that to you. You're about 15 miles from the nearest town and 8 from the nearest neighbor," Adelaide said, moving to the stove to start breakfast. "Who exactly is going to find out?" "I told you bounty hunters don't come this far. There's nothing out here worth their time." "What about you?" he asked quietly. "You're out here." She felt heat rise to her cheeks and kept her attention on slicing bacon. "I'm nobody. Just a woman with a homestead and too much stubborn pride to give it up." "I don't believe that." There was something in his voice that made her look at him. He was watching her with those pale green eyes, and she felt seen in a way that made her uncomfortable and oddly thrilled at the same time. Takes someone special to live alone out here. Takes courage. Takes foolishness, my neighbors would say. She forced herself to turn back to the stove. Most women my age are married with babies. I'm a spinster sitting on dead land. It doesn't look dead to me. I saw your garden. Those vegetables are thriving in soil that would defeat most people. Despite herself, Adelaide felt a small glow of pride. She'd worked hard on that garden, amending the soil with manure and compost, choosing the hardiest varieties, watering carefully from the spring. It was her one vanity, proving that she could make things grow in this unforgiving place. They ate breakfast in comfortable silence, Gideon managing to sit up and eat despite obvious pain. Adelaide noticed he had good manners, the kind that suggested he'd been raised properly before whatever circumstances had led him to this point. "Tell me the truth," she said finally. "The whole story. I deserve to know who I'm sheltering." Gideon set down his fork and met her eyes. "You're right." "You do." He took a breath, gathering his thoughts. "I worked on a ranch outside of Elko, Nevada. The Silver Star, owned by a man named Matthias Harding. Good wages, decent work. I'd been there about 2 years. Harding's son, Carlton, he was trouble from the start. Drank too much, had a mean streak especially when he was in his cups. Most of us hands stayed out of his way." He paused, and Adelaide saw the muscle in his jaw tighten. "There was a girl in town, Sarah Mitchell. She worked at the general store. Sweet thing, couldn't have been more than 19. Carlton took a fancy to her, but she wasn't interested. He didn't like being told no. One night last month, I was in town to pick up supplies. I heard shouting coming from the alley behind the store. Found Carlton with Sarah. He was." Gideon's hands clenched into fists. "He was forcing himself on her. I pulled him off. We fought. I knocked him down and he hit his head on a barrel. Hard. Started bleeding. I checked on him, saw he was breathing, then made sure Sarah got home safe." Adelaide felt her stomach turn. She could picture it all too clearly. "Next morning, Carlton was dead. Apparently he got up after I left, got into a fight with someone else. That person beat him badly and left him in that alley. He died from his injuries. But I'd been seen fighting with him, and his father had enough influence to make sure I was the one blamed. The sheriff came for me before I even heard Carlton was dead. I realized real quick that I wasn't going to get a fair trial, not with Matthias Harding pulling the strings. So I ran. The girl, Sarah, couldn't she testify about what happened?" Gideon's expression turned grim. "She left town the next day. Can't say I blame her. Harding probably would have destroyed her reputation or worse, and without her testimony, it's just my word against a dead man's." Adelaide absorbed this, studying his face for any sign of deception. She found none. "So you've been running for a month?" "Near enough. Been moving west, trying to get somewhere Harding's influence doesn't reach. California, maybe Oregon. Somewhere I could start over, take a new name. But bounty hunters caught up with me near the border 3 days ago. I managed to get away, but not before one of them shot me. And you came here. I came here." He looked around the small cabin, and Adelaide saw it through his eyes. The rough-hewn logs, the simple furniture, the dried herbs hanging from the rafters, the worn but clean rag rugs on the floor. Nothing fancy, but everything cared for. "You've built a good life here, Miss Shaw. I don't want to bring trouble to your door." "Bit late for that," she said dryly. "You're already here. Question is, what do we do now?" He looked at her in surprise. Adelaide surprised herself by saying, "You need time to heal. A few weeks at least. You can stay in the barn, help me with chores once you're strong enough. Anyone comes by, which they won't, you're a hired hand. Simple as that." "Why would you do that for me? You don't know me." I could be lying about all of it. She considered this, then shook her head. I don't think you are. And even if you were, the way I see it, you needed help and I helped you. That's how my father raised me. Besides, she added with a slight smile, I could use a hand around here. Haven't been able to afford hired help in years. Gideon looked at her for a long moment and she saw something shift in his expression, something warm and grateful and surprised. I'll work hard for you, Miss Shaw. Earn my keep and then some. Adelaide, she said. If you're going to be staying, you might as well call me Adelaide. Adelaide. The way he said her name, soft and careful, made something flutter in her chest. Thank you. I won't forget this kindness. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that surprised Adelaide with its ease. Gideon was a good patient, following her instructions about rest and letting her clean and redress his wound twice daily. The infection cleared up quickly once the bullet was out, and by the third day he was up and moving around, though still weak. By the end of the first week, he insisted on helping with chores despite Adelaide's protests. She found him in the barn one morning, mucking out the stall one-handed while sweat beaded on his forehead from the effort. You're going to tear those stitches, she said, hands on her hips. I'm going stir-crazy sitting around while you do all the work, he countered. I can handle this much at least. She couldn't really argue. She understood the need to be useful to earn your place. So she let him help with the lighter chores, and they worked side by side in a companionship that felt natural despite how recently they'd met. Adelaide found herself looking forward to their meals together, to the conversations that ranged from the practical to the philosophical. Gideon was well-read, she discovered, and had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed like that, free and genuine. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about the parents he'd lost to cholera when he was 16, about drifting west looking for work and purpose. She told him about her father, about the dreams he'd had for this land, and how she was determined to honor them even if it meant struggling alone. You're not alone now, Gideon said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the desert. His shoulder was healing well, and he'd graduated to helping with the heavier work. Adelaide felt her heart skip. You won't be here forever. Once you're healed, you'll need to move on. Get to California or wherever you're planning to go. He turned to look at her, and something in his gaze made it hard to breathe. What if I didn't want to move on? Gideon, you have a price on your head. You can't stay here. Eventually someone will come, or you'll need to go to town for supplies and someone will recognize you. I know all that. He looked back out at the darkening horizon. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm somewhere I'm supposed to be. Like I've found something worth staying for. Adelaide knew she should discourage this line of thinking, knew she should remind him of all the practical reasons why whatever was growing between them was impossible. But her heart wasn't listening to practical reasons. Her heart was racing ahead, imagining things it had no business imagining. I feel it too, she admitted quietly, but I'm afraid of what happens when reality catches up with us. Gideon reached over and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. Then let's not think about that tonight. Let's just be here right now and deal with tomorrow when it comes. She squeezed his hand, and they sat there in the gathering darkness, connected by touch and possibility and the fragile hope that maybe, somehow, they could find a way to make this work. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of work and growing closeness. Gideon's shoulder healed remarkably well, and he threw himself into improving the homestead with an energy that amazed Adelaide. He repaired the sagging barn door she'd been meaning to fix for months. He built a better chicken coop that kept the predators out more effectively. He dug out rocks from the garden plot to expand it, his shirt off in the spring heat, and Adelaide tried not to stare at the play of muscles under sun-browned skin. She caught him watching her sometimes too, his green eyes following her movements as she hung laundry or worked in the garden. The attraction between them was palpable, electric, growing stronger with each passing day. It came to a head on a warm afternoon 3 weeks after he'd knocked on her door. Adelaide was in the garden, kneeling in the dirt to thin the carrots, when she felt someone behind her. She looked up to find Gideon there, blocking the sun. "You have dirt on your face," he said, his voice rough. "I usually do when I'm gardening." She smiled up at him. He crouched down beside her and with one gentle finger wiped at her cheek. The touch sent sparks racing through her. "Adelaide, I need to tell you something," her heart hammered. "What is it?" "I'm falling in love with you." The words came out in a rush, like he'd been holding them back for too long. "I know I have no right. I know I'm wanted for murder and I'm putting you at risk just by being here. I know I should leave and never look back, but I can't lie to you or to myself anymore. I'm falling in love with you and I needed you to know." Adelaide felt tears spring to her eyes. "Gideon, you don't have to say anything. I just needed to be honest." He started to stand, but she grabbed his hand and pulled him back down. "I'm falling in love with you too," she said, and watched his eyes widen in surprise and hope. "I have been for days now. Maybe since the beginning, I don't know. But I wake up happy because I know I'll see you. I go to sleep thinking about you. When you smile at me, my whole world lights up. So yes, I love you, Gideon Fuller, even though it's foolish and dangerous and probably impossible." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. "Can I kiss you?" "Yes," she breathed. His lips met hers softly at first, tentative, questioning. Then Adelaide wound her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the longing she'd been suppressing, and the kiss deepened into something that felt like coming home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Gideon rested his forehead against hers. "I don't deserve you," he murmured. "Don't say that. You deserve happiness just as much as anyone. I want to give you everything, Adelaide. I want to make this homestead thrive. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a life here with you." He pulled back to look into her eyes. "But I don't know how to make that possible when I'm a wanted man." Adelaide had been thinking about this problem for days, turning it over in her mind. "What if you weren't Gideon Fuller anymore?" He frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if Gideon Fuller disappeared? What if you became someone else, someone with no past, no price on his head? We're 15 miles from town. Most people don't even know I exist out here. What if you became my husband, taking my last name the way some men do when they marry into property? You'd be Gideon Shaw. No one would connect you to a wanted man from Nevada. Adelaide, that's identity fraud. If anyone discovered it, how would they discover it? The circuit preacher comes through Jordan Valley twice a year. He married my parents back in the 70s. He doesn't know every wanted man in the territory. We could go to him next time he's in town, get properly married. You'd have legal papers saying you're Gideon Shaw, my husband. As far as anyone would know, you're just a man who came west looking for work and found a wife instead." Gideon stared at her. "You'd marry me, risk everything on the chance that this could work." "I'd rather risk everything with you than live safely without you." She meant it with every fiber of her being. "These past weeks have been the happiest of my life. I don't want to go back to being alone. You might end up alone anyway if they catch me, if they hang me for a murder I didn't commit. Then we'll have whatever time we have together and I'll be grateful for it." She took his hands in hers. "Gideon, I love you. That's not going to change whether you stay or go. If you go, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. If you stay, at least we have a chance at happiness." He searched her face, and she saw the moment he decided to take the leap of faith. "Yes," he said. Yes, I'll stay. I'll be Gideon Shaw, your husband, if you'll have me. I'll have you, she said, and kissed him again to seal the promise. They had 2 months before the circuit preacher would come through Jordan Valley again. 2 months to establish Gideon's presence, to make his face familiar to the few people who might see them together. Adelaide made the trip to town with him for supplies in early June, introducing him as her hired hand to the shopkeeper. If anyone thought it odd that a single woman had taken on help, they didn't say so to her face. Gideon kept his hat low and spoke little, but Adelaide noticed how his eyes constantly scanned the street, watching for trouble. She understood the fear he carried, the knowledge that any moment someone might recognize him. But Jordan Valley was a small, quiet town on the edge of nowhere. Most of the wanted posters here were years old, and no one paid much attention to a dusty cowboy standing beside Adelaide Shaw. They made the trip successfully, and Adelaide felt some of the tension ease from Gideon's shoulders as they rode back toward the homestead. "That wasn't so bad," he said. "Told you. People out here mind their own business mostly. We're too busy surviving to worry about strangers." Back at the cabin, they fell into domesticity that felt both thrilling and natural. Gideon was a good cook, better than Adelaide in some ways, and he took over making supper most evenings. They worked together on the endless tasks of keeping a homestead running, and in the evenings they sat on the porch talking or reading from Adelaide's small collection of books. They were careful about propriety, even though they were alone. Gideon slept in the barn, insisted on it despite Adelaide's protests that he should at least take the bed while she took the chair. "I'm not risking your reputation, even out here," he said firmly. "We'll do this right. We'll wait until we're properly married." Adelaide appreciated his respect even as her body ached for more than stolen kisses. But she understood his reasoning. If anything went wrong, if they were discovered, she didn't want anyone able to claim she'd been living in sin with a wanted man. The waiting was sweet torture. Every touch lingered. Every glance held promise. They were building something together, brick by brick, day by day, and Adelaide had never been happier. July came hot and dry, and with it the circuit preacher, Reverend Thomas Blackthorne, a weathered man in his 60s who'd been traveling through this territory since before Adelaide was born. She and Gideon rode into town on a Saturday morning, both dressed in their best clothes. Adelaide wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in cedar, a simple blue calico that still fit her well. Gideon wore clean trousers and a white shirt Adelaide had made for him, his dark hair trimmed neatly. The Reverend didn't ask many questions. He'd married dozens of couples over the years, cowboys and ranch hands to farmers' daughters and widow women. One more wedding was just another day's work to him. He performed the ceremony in the small church on the edge of town with 2 townspeople pulled in as witnesses, neither of whom Adelaide knew well. "Do you, Gideon Shaw, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Gideon said, his voice strong and sure, his eyes locked on Adelaide's. "And do you, Adelaide Shaw, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Adelaide whispered, tears of joy blurring her vision. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Oregon, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Gideon kissed her gently, sweetly in front of God and witnesses, and Adelaide felt like her heart might burst from happiness. They were married. He was hers and she was his, legally and truly. The Reverend filled out the marriage certificate with careful handwriting. Gideon Shaw and Adelaide Shaw, married this 9th day of July, 1884 in Jordan Valley, Oregon. Legal proof of his new identity. Protection, they hoped, from the past that hunted him. They rode back to the homestead as husband and wife, the sun blazing overhead, the desert spreading out around them in shades of gold and green. When they reached the cabin, Gideon dismounted and then lifted Adelaide down from her horse, holding her close. "Mrs. Shaw," he said, testing out the words. "Mr. Shaw," she replied, smiling up at him. He carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and then the laughter faded into something deeper, more urgent. They'd waited so long, been so careful. Now, finally, they could let go of all that restraint. Their first time together was tender and awkward and beautiful. Gideon was gentle, constantly checking that she was all right, that he wasn't hurting her. Adelaide had known the basics, but not the reality, and she discovered that reality was so much better than she'd imagined. The feel of his skin against hers, the taste of his kisses, the way he whispered her name like a prayer. They made love in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the cabin window, and afterward lay tangled together in her bed, now their bed, both of them dazed and happy. "I love you," Gideon said, pressing kisses to her temple, her cheek, her lips. "I love you so much, Adelaide. I love you too. I can't believe you're really mine. I'm really yours, for as long as you'll have me." "Forever then," she said firmly. "I'll have you forever." The summer passed in a haze of happiness and hard work. They worked the homestead together, and under their combined efforts, it began to thrive in a way it never had when Adelaide was alone. Gideon had a knack for fixing things, for solving problems that had seemed insurmountable. He built a better irrigation system for the garden, dug a second well closer to the house, repaired the roof that had been leaking for 2 winters. Adelaide taught him about the chickens and the cow, about which wild plants were edible and which to avoid, about how to read the weather in this country where storms could come up fast and deadly. They were partners in every sense, sharing the work and the rewards. At night, they shared the bed, and Adelaide discovered that the physical side of marriage was something she enjoyed immensely. Gideon was an attentive lover, learning what pleased her, taking his time. They explored each other with joy and laughter and growing confidence, and Adelaide blessed the isolation that meant no one could hear them. August brought the oppressive heat of high summer. They worked in the early morning and evening, resting in the shade during the worst of the afternoon heat. One particularly hot day, Adelaide convinced Gideon to come with her to the small swimming hole she'd discovered about a mile from the cabin, a place where the spring that fed their well pooled deep enough to fully submerge. They stripped down to their undergarments and waded in, gasping at the cold water. Adelaide floated on her back, staring up at the brilliant blue sky, feeling utterly content. Gideon swam over and pulled her against him, both of them treading water. "This is perfect," he said. "This moment, this place, everything. No regrets about staying, not a single one. Though I'll admit, every time we go to town I expect someone to recognize me, to point and shout. The fear is always there. But no one has. It's been almost 5 months since you knocked on my door. Maybe enough time has passed. Maybe Harding has given up the chase. Maybe." But Gideon didn't sound convinced. Men like him don't give up easily, especially when their pride has been wounded. He wants someone to pay for his son's death, and I'm that someone. Adelaide heard the resignation in his voice and splashed water at him. "Then we'll stay vigilant, keep to ourselves, build our life here where no one's looking. We're doing fine so far." He smiled and splashed her back, and the conversation dissolved into a water fight that ended with both of them laughing and breathless, wrapped in each other's arms in the cool water while the summer sun beat down. September brought the first hints of autumn, the nights growing cooler, the light taking on a golden quality. Adelaide realized her monthly bleeding hadn't come, and then another month passed with no sign of it. She was pregnant. The knowledge filled her with equal parts joy and terror. she told Gideon one evening as they sat on the porch, his arm around her shoulders. "I'm going to have a baby, our baby." She felt him go still, then he turned to look at her, his eyes wide. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be. I've missed 2 months now, and I've been feeling sick in the mornings. All the signs are there." A smile spread slowly across Gideon's face, growing until it was brighter than the sunset. "We're going to have a baby. Adelaide, I don't even have words. That's wonderful. You're happy." She'd been so afraid he'd be worried about bringing a child into their uncertain situation. Happy doesn't even begin to cover it. He pulled her close and kissed her soundly. "I'm over the moon. I'm going to be a father. We're going to be parents." They held each other as the stars came out, making plans and dreaming about the future. Gideon wanted to build an addition onto the cabin, a proper bedroom for them and a nursery for the baby. Adelaide wanted to plant an apple tree, something that would grow alongside their child, bearing fruit for years to come. "Boy or girl, what do you hope for?" Adelaide asked. "Healthy is all I hope for, but if I'm being honest, I'd love a little girl who looks just like her mother." "I think I'd like a boy first. A son to help with the heavy work when he's older." Gideon laughed. "We don't get to choose, I don't think. We'll love whoever arrives." October turned the cottonwoods along the creek golden, and Gideon worked furiously to get the addition built before winter set in. He was a surprisingly skilled carpenter, and Adelaide learned he'd worked construction for a while in Kansas before heading west. The new room was small but solid, with a real glass window Gideon had bought on their last trip to town. They didn't go to town often, maybe once every 6 weeks now that they had supplies stored up. Each trip was tense for Gideon, but each successful trip where no one questioned their story helped him relax a little more. The townspeople who knew Adelaide seemed pleased she'd found a husband, and if anyone wondered about Gideon Shaw or where he'd come from, they didn't ask. Adelaide's pregnancy progressed normally, and as her belly began to swell with the evidence of the life growing inside her, she felt more connected to this land and this life than ever before. She was building a family here, creating something that would last beyond her own lifetime. It gave everything new meaning. November brought the first snow, just a dusting that melted by afternoon, but a reminder that winter was coming. Gideon made sure they had plenty of firewood split and stacked, plenty of supplies laid in. He'd shot a deer, and they'd preserved the meat, smoking and salting it to last through the cold months. The chickens were laying less as the days shortened, but they had eggs stored in water glass in the cellar. They were as ready as they could be when the first real storm hit in early December, dumping 8 inches of snow and bringing winds that howled around the cabin like wolves. They stayed inside for 3 days, keeping the fire going, reading and talking and simply being together. Adelaide made bread and Gideon carved a cradle from pieces of pine, his hands sure and careful. "You're good at that," Adelaide observed, watching him work. "My father was a woodworker. He taught me some before he died. I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed it. Maybe you could make furniture to sell. We could use the extra income, especially with a baby coming." Gideon considered this. "I'd like that. Honest work, something I can take pride in. Yes, I think I could do that." Christmas came and they celebrated quietly, just the two of them. Adelaide made a special dinner with the last of the venison roast, and Gideon gave her a necklace he'd carved from a piece of dark wood, polished smooth, in the shape of a heart. She gave him a new shirt she'd sewn and a scarf she'd knitted. They were simple gifts but given with love, and that made them precious. As they lay in bed that night, Gideon's hand resting on Adelaide's swollen belly, he said, "This is the best Christmas I've ever had. The best year of my life." "Mine too," Adelaide agreed. "I was so lonely before you came." I didn't even realize how lonely until I wasn't anymore. I'm grateful every day that I knocked on your door, that you took a chance on me. I'm grateful you knocked." She laced her fingers through his. "Whatever happens, Gideon, we'll face it together." "Together," he agreed, and kissed her softly in the firelight. January 1885 arrived with bitter cold and heavy snows. They were snowed in for nearly 2 weeks, living off their stored supplies, keeping warm by the fire and in each other's arms. Adelaide's belly was round and full now, the baby active, kicking and rolling. Gideon loved to feel the movement, his face full of wonder every time. "He's strong," he'd say, or "she's going to be a fighter." Adelaide felt huge and awkward, her back aching, her sleep restless. But Gideon was endlessly patient and helpful, rubbing her sore feet, helping her with tasks that had become difficult. His tenderness made her love him even more. February was the month her father had died, and Adelaide felt melancholy as the anniversary approached. Gideon found her crying one evening and held her close. "Tell me about him," he said gently. So Adelaide talked about her father, about his dreams and his determination, about how he'd loved her mother who died when Adelaide was only 8, about how he'd taught Adelaide everything he knew about surviving in this harsh country. Talking about him helped, made the grief feel less heavy. "He would have liked you," she said finally. "He would have been happy I found someone good." "I hope I'm worthy of that," Gideon said. "I hope I make him proud by taking care of you and this land he loved. You are worthy, and he would be proud, I know it." March brought the first hints of spring, and Adelaide's labor pains began on a morning when the snow was melting and the first green shoots were pushing through the earth. Gideon nearly panicked, but Adelaide talked him through it, explaining what needed to happen, what he needed to do to help her. The labor was long and hard, lasting through the day and into the night. Gideon stayed with her every moment, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement. When Adelaide was ready to give up, certain she couldn't do this, he told her how strong she was, how much he loved her, how their baby needed her to keep going. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, their son was born, coming into the world with a loud cry that seemed impossibly big for such a small creature. Gideon cut the cord with shaking hands while Adelaide collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted but euphoric. "A boy," she whispered as Gideon cleaned him and wrapped him in the soft blankets she'd prepared. "We have a son." "We have a son," Gideon repeated wonderingly. He brought the baby to Adelaide and placed him in her arms. "He's perfect. Look at him, Adelaide. He's absolutely perfect." The baby had a shock of dark hair like his father and tiny fists that waved in the air. His eyes were the dark blue of all newborns, but Adelaide thought she could see hints of green in them. He was beautiful and perfect, and theirs. "What should we name him?" Adelaide asked. They discussed names throughout her pregnancy but never settled on one. Now, looking at their son, Gideon said, "What about Daniel? It means God is my judge, seems fitting." Adelaide understood. If Gideon couldn't get justice from human courts, perhaps he'd find it in a higher court someday. "Daniel Shaw, I like it. Daniel Shaw." Little Daniel nursed hungrily, and Adelaide felt such a rush of love it nearly overwhelmed her. This was her son, hers and Gideon's, the product of their love and their hope for the future. No matter what happened, they'd created this life together. The first weeks with a newborn were exhausting and wonderful and terrifying. Daniel needed to eat constantly and didn't sleep for more than a few hours at a time. Adelaide was sore and tired, and Gideon took on as much as he could, changing diapers, walking with the baby when he fussed, bringing Adelaide food and water so she could rest. "You're a natural father," Adelaide told him one night as she watched him rock Daniel, singing a soft song. I'm making it up as I go, Gideon admitted. But I love him so much already. I'd do anything for him, for both of you. By April, they'd settled into something resembling a routine. Daniel was growing well, getting chubby cheeks and a ready smile. Adelaide's body was healing, and she was able to resume more of her normal work. The homestead was waking up from winter, and there was so much to do. On a warm afternoon in May, nearly a year after Gideon had first knocked on Adelaide's door, they were working in the garden together, Daniel sleeping in a basket in the shade, when they heard hoofbeats approaching. Adelaide's heart seized with fear. They rarely had visitors, and unexpected company was never good. Gideon immediately stood, his hand going to the revolver he wore now when working outside. 2 riders crested the small rise that led to their cabin. Adelaide felt Gideon tense beside her. "Get Daniel and go inside," he said quietly. "No, we face this together." The riders drew closer, and Adelaide could see they were well-armed men with the hard look of bounty hunters or lawmen. Her stomach dropped. After all these months of peace, had Gideon's past finally caught up with them? The men reined in a few yards away. The older one, a weathered man with a marshal's badge, touched his hat. "Afternoon. I'm Marshal Wade Garrett from Elko, Nevada. This is my deputy. We're looking for a man named of Gideon Fuller. You folks seen anyone matching his description around these parts?" Adelaide felt Gideon's hand find hers and squeeze. She understood what he was silently telling her. "Let me do the talking." "Gideon Fuller," Gideon said, his voice calm. "Can't say I've heard that name. What's he wanted for?" "Murder. Killed a young man back in Nevada about a year ago. There's a reward out for information leading to his capture." The marshal's eyes were sharp, taking in everything. The garden, the cabin, the addition Gideon had built, the baby sleeping peacefully in the basket. "A murder from a year ago," Adelaide spoke up, keeping her voice steady. "Seems like a long trail to follow. The victim's father is a persistent man. Hired us special to track Fuller down. We've been following leads west. Last anyone saw him, he was headed this direction. Wondered if maybe he'd stopped here looking for work or supplies." "We haven't had any strangers through here," Gideon said. "It's just my wife Adelaide and me, and our son. We don't get many visitors this far out." The marshal studied them both for a long moment, and Adelaide was terrified he'd see through their story, recognize Gideon despite the year of growth and change. But finally he nodded. "You folks have any trouble with strangers, anyone suspicious, you let the law know. There's good money in that reward." "We'll keep that in mind," Adelaide said. The marshal tipped his hat again. "Appreciate your time. Sorry to disturb you folks." He started to turn his horse, then paused. "Say what you say your name was." Adelaide held her breath. "Gideon Shaw," Gideon said clearly. "This is my homestead." "Shaw, right. Well, good luck to you folks. That's a fine-looking baby you've got there." "Thank you, Marshal." They watched the 2 men ride away, not moving until they disappeared over the rise. Then Gideon's legs seemed to give out, and he sank down right there in the garden, his face pale. "That was too close," he said, his voice shaking. "Adelaide, if he'd recognized me, but he didn't." Adelaide knelt beside him, taking his face in her hands. "He didn't recognize you because you're not Gideon Fuller anymore. You're Gideon Shaw, my husband, Daniel's father. That man is gone. What if they come back? What if they keep looking? Then we deal with it. But Gideon, listen to me. You've built a life here, a real life, a legal life. You're married, you have a son, you own property. You're not some drifter they can just grab. You're a settled family man. That carries weight, even out here." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I'm so afraid of losing this, losing you and Daniel. I couldn't bear it." "You're not going to lose us. We're going to be fine." Daniel chose that moment to wake up and start crying, and the ordinary need of their son broke the tension. Gideon went to pick him up, holding him close and breathing in that baby smell. "Hey there, little man. Everything's all right. Papa's here." Adelaide watched them together, father and son, and felt fierce determination rise in her. She'd fought this land for survival, and she'd fight anyone who tried to take her family from her. They'd come too far and built too much to let it be destroyed by a false accusation and a vengeful rich man. The marshal's visit left them shaken, but also more determined. They were extra careful over the next few months, watching for any sign that the bounty hunters had returned. But as summer turned to fall and no one else came, they began to relax again, to believe that maybe they'd really gotten away with it. Gideon's furniture making took off better than they'd expected. He'd made several pieces for their own cabin, and Adelaide had taken a small table into town on one of their supply trips. The shopkeeper had been so impressed he'd commissioned 3 more, and word spread. Soon Gideon had more orders than he could fill, working in the evenings by lamplight while Daniel slept, and Adelaide mended or read aloud to him. The extra income made a real difference. They were able to buy breeding stock, a small herd of cattle that Gideon managed while Adelaide handled the chickens and garden. The homestead was finally becoming profitable, finally living up to her father's dreams. Daniel grew fast, hitting all his milestones early. By his first birthday in March of 1886, he was walking and getting into everything, his personality emerging bright and curious. He had Adelaide's smile and Gideon's green eyes and a laugh that could light up the darkest day. They celebrated with a small cake Adelaide made and gifts they'd crafted themselves. A wooden horse Gideon carved and a soft quilt Adelaide had pieced together. Daniel was more interested in the wrapping paper than the gifts, making them both laugh. "I can't believe he's already a year old," Adelaide said that night as they watched him sleep. "It went so fast." "Everything's going fast," Gideon agreed. 2 years since I knocked on your door. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like I've been here forever. I want forever with you, many more years of this." "I want that too, more than anything." He kissed her softly. "Think maybe we should give Daniel a sibling. I know it's soon, but I'd like that," Adelaide interrupted, smiling. "I don't want him to be an only child." "And I loved being pregnant, despite the discomfort. Knowing I was growing our baby inside me, that was special." "Then let's try for another," Gideon said and pulled her close. By summer, Adelaide was pregnant again, and this time the pregnancy was easier. She knew what to expect, and her body seemed to remember what to do. She wasn't as sick, wasn't as tired, and having a toddler to chase after kept her mind off the minor discomforts. They made plans to expand the cabin again, add another small bedroom so Daniel wouldn't have to share with the new baby forever. Gideon's carpentry skills had only improved, and he designed a beautiful addition with built-in shelves and a window that would catch the morning sun. Life had settled into a pattern of work and family and quiet contentment. They went to town only when necessary, kept to themselves, raised their son, and prepared for their second child. The bounty hunters never returned, and the fear that had haunted Gideon began to fade into the background. In December, during a cold snap that reminded them of their first winter together, Adelaide's labor started. This time Gideon was calmer, more confident. He knew what to do, how to help her, and this labor was faster, easier. Their daughter was born just after sunrise, coming into the world with a cry almost as loud as her brother's had been. "A girl," Adelaide breathed, cradling the tiny baby. "We have a daughter." "She's beautiful," Gideon said, his voice thick with emotion, "just like her mother." They named her Emma Grace Shaw, and she was indeed beautiful with delicate features and wispy blonde hair that neither parent could account for. "Must be from my grandmother," Adelaide said. "She was blonde in the pictures." Emma was a calmer baby than Daniel had been, content to nurse and sleep and watch the world with solemn blue eyes. Daniel was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to touch her constantly, to help take care of her. Gideon made him a small stool so he could stand beside the cradle and rock it, and Daniel took his job as big brother very seriously. The winter of 1886 to 1887 was mild, and by spring they were all thriving. Adelaide had never felt stronger or happier. Her children were healthy, her husband was devoted, and the homestead was finally turning a real profit. They'd come through the hardest times and come out better for it. On a warm evening in May, 3 years after Gideon had first knocked on her door, they sat on the porch together watching Daniel chase fireflies while Emma slept against Adelaide's shoulder. "You ever think about what your life would have been if you hadn't run that night?" Adelaide asked quietly. "If you'd stayed and faced trial," Gideon was silent for a long moment. "Sometimes. I think they would have hanged me. Harding would have made sure of it, so I'd be dead and I never would have met you, never would have had these children, this life." He looked at her, his eyes intense. "I can't regret running when it brought me here. I know it was wrong legally, and maybe someday I'll have to answer for that, but I can't regret the choices that led me to you. I can't regret them either, even knowing we're living a lie in some ways. Because this feels more true than anything else in my life. You, our children, this home we've built, that's the truth that matters. I love you, Adelaide Shaw. I love you, Gideon Shaw." Daniel ran up to them then, his hands cupped carefully. "Papa, look, I caught one." They admired the firefly blinking between his small fingers before Gideon helped him release it, and they all watched it fly away into the dusk, a small light in the darkness. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and growth. Daniel started helping with the chores as soon as he was big enough, eager to be like his father. Emma was a quieter child but no less determined, following Adelaide everywhere and learning to cook and sew and tend the garden. In 1889, Adelaide had another baby, a second son they named Samuel after Gideon's father. Samuel was the biggest of their babies, with a lusty cry and an appetite to match. He kept them all busy and exhausted but happy. The homestead continued to expand and improve. Gideon built a proper barn to replace the old one, and they increased their cattle herd to 20 head. Adelaide's garden was legendary now in Jordan Valley, and she sold produce and preserves to several families in town. They were prosperous in a way Adelaide's father had never managed, and she liked to think he'd be proud. Gideon's furniture was in demand as far away as Boy's, and he'd trained Daniel to help with the simpler pieces. Father and son worked side by side in the workshop Gideon had built, their heads bent over wood and tools, and Adelaide loved to watch them together. They'd been blessed, she thought often. Despite the lies they'd had to tell, despite the fear that occasionally resurfaced when strangers came through, they'd been blessed with a good life and a strong family. In the summer of 1892, 7 years after they'd married, Adelaide was hanging laundry when a rider approached. She tensed instinctively, years of wariness still ingrained, but relaxed when she recognized the circuit preacher, Reverend Blackthorne. "Reverend, what brings you out this way?" The old man dismounted slowly, his movements stiff with age. "Mrs. Shaw, good to see you." "I was hoping to speak with you and your husband. Is he about?" "He's in the workshop. I'll fetch him." Adelaide called for Gideon, her mind racing. Why would the preacher come all the way out here? It couldn't be good news. Gideon emerged from the workshop with Daniel at his heels, both dusted with sawdust. He saw the preacher and Adelaide saw him go tense, but his smile was easy as he greeted the man. "Reverend Blackthorne, this is unexpected. Mr. Shaw, I apologize for the intrusion. Might we speak privately?" Gideon glanced at Adelaide, who nodded. "Daniel, go check on your sister and brother, please." Once the boy had gone, the three adults stood in awkward silence. Finally, the Reverend sighed. "I'll come straight to it. I received a letter some weeks back from a Marshal Garrett in Nevada. He was inquiring about marriages I'd performed in the past few years, specifically looking for anyone who might match the description of a man named Gideon Fuller." Adelaide felt the world tilt. After all these years, after they'd thought they were safe, the past had found them anyway. "I didn't respond immediately," the Reverend continued. "Wanted to think on it, pray on it, and I wanted to come speak with you both directly before I did anything." He looked at Gideon steadily. "Are you Gideon Fuller?" Gideon's hand found Adelaide's. "Yes, sir, I am, or I was." "The marshal says you're wanted for murder." "I'm wanted, yes, but I didn't commit the murder I'm accused of. I was falsely accused by a powerful man who needed someone to blame for his son's death." The Reverend studied him for a long moment. "I've known you 7 years now, Mr. Fuller or Mr. Shaw. In that time, I've seen you build a life here, raise a family, become a respected member of this community. I've never seen anything in you that suggests violence or dishonesty." "Because he's a good man," Adelaide said fiercely. "The best man I know. He saved a young woman from being assaulted and was blamed for the consequences. Coming here, taking a new name, was the only way he could survive. I understand, and I find myself in a difficult position." The Reverend sat down heavily on the porch step. "The law says I should turn you in, but my conscience says that you've already been punished enough by having to live in fear all these years. And I'm not convinced that turning you in would serve justice. What are you going to do?" Gideon asked, his voice steady despite the tension Adelaide could feel in his body. "I'm going to write back to Marshal Garrett and tell him I have no record of anyone matching that description. I'm going to forget I ever received his letter." The Reverend looked up at them both. "But you need to understand, Mr. Shaw, that this won't be the end. Sooner or later your past will catch up with you. Men like this Matthias Harding don't give up easily." "I know," Gideon said quietly. "I've always known, but I had to try. For Adelaide, for our children. They deserve a father, a husband. They deserve a life." "Yes, they do." The Reverend stood, looking every one of his 70 years. "I'll keep your secret, Mr. Shaw, but I'd advise you to be prepared. Have a plan for if the worst happens. Make sure your family is protected." After the Reverend left, Adelaide and Gideon sat together on the porch in silence. Finally, Adelaide said, "We need to tell the children something. They're old enough now to understand at least the basics. I don't want to frighten them. They need to know. If men come looking, if something happens to you, they need to understand why." It was one of the hardest conversations of their lives. They sat Daniel, Emma, and even little Samuel down and explained as simply as they could that their father had been blamed for something he didn't do, that bad men might come looking for him someday. Daniel, at 9 years old, was old enough to grasp the seriousness. Emma, at 6, mostly understood. Samuel, at 3, just knew Papa looked sad and climbed into his lap for comfort. "Are they going to take you away?" Daniel asked, his voice small. "I don't know, son. I hope not. But if they do, I need you to be strong for your mother and sister and brother. Can you do that?" Daniel nodded solemnly. "I'll take care of them, Papa. I promise." Gideon pulled all 3 children into a hug, and Adelaide joined them, the 5 of them wrapped together in a circle of love and fear and determination. 2 more years passed without incident. Life continued in its rhythms, and slowly the tension eased again. Daniel grew tall and strong. Emma developed her mother's skill with plants and her father's way with wood, and Samuel was a whirlwind of energy and mischief. In 1894, Adelaide was 33 and Gideon 35. They'd been together for 9 years, married for 7, and had built a life that seemed solid and permanent. The homestead was thriving, their children were healthy and happy, and they'd carved out a place of peace in the wilderness. Then, on a cold November morning, 4 riders appeared on the horizon. Gideon saw them from the barn where he was working and immediately went to the house. "Adelaide, take the children to the cellar. Now." She didn't argue, didn't ask questions. They'd prepared for this. She gathered Emma and Samuel and called for Daniel, herding them all down into the cool darkness of the root cellar. "Stay here no matter what you hear," she told them. "Stay quiet and stay hidden." "Mama, what's happening?" Emma asked, her eyes wide. "Just a precaution, sweetheart. Everything will be fine." She climbed back up and closed the cellar door, covering it with a rug. Then she went to stand beside Gideon, who was waiting on the porch with his hands visible and empty. The riders approached slowly, and Adelaide recognized one of them, Marshal Garrett, older now but still sharp-eyed. "Mr. Shaw," the marshal said, not dismounting. "Or should I say Mr. Fuller?" Gideon didn't deny it. "Marshal, you've led us on a merry chase, I'll give you that. 9 years. But we finally got confirmation from a man who used to work on the Silver Star, recognized you from a distance in Jordan Valley last month. Took some convincing, but we're certain now." "I didn't kill Carlton Harding," Gideon said steadily. "I stopped him from assaulting a young woman and I knocked him down in the process, but I didn't kill him. Someone else did that later. That's for a court to decide. I'm here to bring you back to Nevada to stand trial. After 9 years, the trail is cold, the witnesses scattered. I've built a life here, Marshal. I have a wife and children. Please don't do this." The marshal's expression softened slightly. "I don't take pleasure in this, Mr. Fuller, but the law is the law. You ran instead of facing your accusers. That makes you guilty of something at the very least." Adelaide stepped forward. "Marshal Garrett, my husband, is a good man. In the 9 years he's been here, he's never caused trouble, never broken a law. He's a devoted father and husband, a skilled craftsman, a valuable member of our community. Taking him away will destroy our family." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Shaw. Truly I am, but I have a job to do." "Then let me come with him," Adelaide said suddenly. "Let me come to Nevada, testify on his behalf. Let me help him fight these false charges." "Adelaide, no," Gideon protested. "The children need you here. The children need their father." She turned back to the marshal. "Give us time to make arrangements, a few days. We need to find someone to watch the homestead and the children. Then we'll come with you peacefully. No trouble." The marshal considered this, then nodded. 3 days. "But I'll be leaving 2 men here to make sure you don't run again. We'll make camp on your property." "Agreed," Adelaide said before Gideon could argue. After the marshal and 2 of his men rode back toward town, leaving the other 2 to watch the homestead, Adelaide and Gideon went inside to face the reality of what was coming. "You shouldn't come with me," Gideon said. "It could be dangerous. And the children will be safe with the Hendersons." Their neighbors 8 miles away had become friends over the years, and Adelaide trusted them completely. "And I'm coming with you whether you like it or not. I'm not letting you face this alone. Adelaide, if they convict me, if they hang me, I don't want you to see that. They're not going to hang you. We're going to prove your innocence. We're going to find that young woman, Sarah Mitchell. We're going to get testimony from the actual witnesses. We're going to clear your name once and for all so we can stop living in fear." Gideon pulled her into his arms. "I love you so much. You're the strongest person I know. We're strong together. We'll get through this together." They explained to the children what was happening. that they had to go away for a while but that they'd come back as soon as they could. Daniel tried to be brave, but his chin trembled. Emma cried. Samuel didn't fully understand but clung to Adelaide's skirts. The Hendersons agreed to take the children, and Adelaide spent 3 days preparing, making sure they had everything they'd need, giving them so many hugs and kisses that they squirmed. "Be good," she told them over and over. "Mind Mr. and Mrs. Henderson. We'll be back soon." The journey to Nevada took 2 weeks, traveling with the marshal and his men. Adelaide rode beside Gideon, and at night they were allowed to share a tent, though Gideon's hands were bound. It was humiliating and frightening, but they clung to each other and to hope. Elko hadn't changed much in 9 years. The Silver Star Ranch was still the biggest operation around, and Matthias Harding was still one of the most powerful men in the territory. The trial was set for December, giving them a few weeks to prepare a defense. Adelaide used every penny they'd saved to hire a lawyer, a sharp young man named William Pierce, who actually listened to their story. He sent investigators to find Sarah Mitchell, to track down the other ranch hands who'd been working at the Silver Star at the time. Sarah was found in Sacramento, married now with 2 children of her own. At first she didn't want to get involved, afraid of Harding's retribution. But when Adelaide went to see her personally, explained that Gideon had 3 children who needed their father, Sarah agreed to come testify. The trial was held in the Elko courthouse, and the town turned out to watch. Matthias Harding sat in the front row, his face carved from stone. He was older now, grayer, but no less imposing. The prosecution presented their case. Gideon had been seen fighting with Carlton, had been heard threatening him, had been found with blood on his hands. Circumstantial evidence, but damning nonetheless. Then the defense took over. Sarah Mitchell testified about the assault, about how Gideon had saved her. Other ranch hands testified that Carlton had been alive when they last saw him, after Gideon had left town. The town doctor testified that Carlton's fatal injuries were inconsistent with the fight described, that someone had beaten him savagely hours after Gideon had knocked him down. Adelaide testified about the man she knew, the husband and father who'd never shown any sign of violence or dishonesty. She described their life together, their children, the respect Gideon had earned in their community. And finally, Gideon testified on his own behalf. He told the truth, plainly and without embellishment. He admitted he'd hit Carlton but maintained he'd never intended to kill him, had only been defending Sarah. He described his terror when he realized he was being blamed for a murder he didn't commit, his desperate decision to run. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Adelaide barely slept, barely ate, praying constantly for the right outcome. Gideon sat in his cell and she visited him every day, bringing him food and hope. When the jury came back, Adelaide held her breath. "We find the defendant not guilty of murder." The courtroom erupted. Adelaide burst into tears of relief. Gideon's legs buckled and his lawyer caught him. Matthias Harding stood abruptly and walked out, his face rigid with fury. But it wasn't over yet. The judge called for order and addressed Gideon directly. "Mr. Fuller, while you've been acquitted of murder, you are guilty of fleeing justice and evading arrest. However, given the circumstances and the considerable time that has passed, I'm sentencing you to time served. You're free to go. Free." After 9 years of running, of hiding, of living in fear, Gideon was finally free. Adelaide ran to him and they held each other while the courtroom buzzed around them. "It's over," she sobbed. "It's finally over. We can go home," Gideon said, his voice thick with emotion. "We can go home to our children and live without fear. Adelaide, it's really over." The journey back to Oregon was joyful despite the winter cold. They talked about the future, about all the things they could do now that they didn't have to hide. Gideon could use his real name again, could acknowledge his past without fear. They could travel, could visit other towns, could live fully in the open. When they reached the Henderson ranch and saw their children run out to meet them, Adelaide thought her heart might burst. Daniel reached them first, throwing his arms around Gideon. Emma and Samuel piled on, all of them laughing and crying at once. "Is it over?" Daniel asked. "Are you really free, Papa?" "I'm really free, son. We all are." They rode home together as a family, and when the cabin came into view over the rise, Adelaide felt such a surge of love and gratitude that she could barely breathe. This place, this land that had seemed so lonely and harsh when she was alone, had become a haven. This was where she'd found love, built a family, created a life worth fighting for. That night, after the children were asleep, Adelaide and Gideon lay together in their bed, holding each other close. "I keep waiting to wake up and find this was all a dream," Gideon said. "That I'm still running, still hunted. It's real. You're exonerated. The charges are dropped. You're Gideon Fuller again if you want to be." "I think I'll stay Gideon Shaw," he said thoughtfully. "That's who I've been for 9 years. That's the man you married, the father my children know. Fuller was someone else, someone from a different life. Then, Gideon Shaw, you'll stay, and we'll live the rest of our lives without looking over our shoulders." He kissed her deeply, and their lovemaking that night was sweet and unhurried, a celebration of freedom and future and the love that had sustained them through everything. The years that followed were golden. Without the shadow of fear hanging over them, they thrived. Gideon's furniture business expanded, and he took on Daniel as a full partner when the boy turned 16. Emma married a good man from Jordan Valley, a young farmer named Thomas who treated her like a queen. They built a house on the edge of Adelaide and Gideon's property, staying close to family. Samuel grew tall and broad-shouldered, with his father's skill with wood and his mother's head for business. He took over much of the ranch management, increasing their cattle operation until it was one of the most successful in the region. In 1899, Adelaide and Gideon's oldest grandchild was born, Emma's daughter Grace. Holding that baby, Adelaide felt the circle complete. She'd been alone in this cabin once, certain she'd die a spinster with no family. Now she had children and grandchildren, a husband who loved her deeply, and a legacy that would continue long after she was gone. "Thank you," she told Gideon one evening as they watched the sunset, their routine for over 15 years now. "For what?" "For knocking on my door that night. For trusting me, for building this life with me. I should be thanking you. You saved my life in every way that matters. You gave me a home, a family, a future. You believed in me when no one else would." "We saved each other," Adelaide said simply. Two lonely people who found each other in the middle of nowhere and decided to build something beautiful. And we did. Look at all this. He gestured at the homestead, expanded now with multiple buildings, at the garden that Adelaide still tended, at the pastures where their cattle grazed. "Your father would be proud. He would. And more importantly, I'm proud. We did this together, Gideon. We turned this harsh land into a home." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned pink and gold and purple, the colors of the high desert they both loved. The children's laughter carried from Emma's house, where the family was gathering for supper. The evening was warm and peaceful, and Adelaide felt such contentment that it almost frightened her. "I love you," she said, turning to look at her husband. He was graying at the temples now, lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth, but to her he was as handsome as the desperate young man who'd stumbled onto her porch 15 years ago. "I love you too. Always have, always will." The years continued their steady march. More grandchildren came, 7 in total by 1905. Daniel married a schoolteacher from Boys and brought her to live on the homestead, building yet another house on the property. The Shaw family compound grew, 3 generations living and working together in harmony. Adelaide was 54 in 1905, Gideon 46, and they were both still active and healthy. They'd adjusted their workload, letting the younger generation take on more of the physical labor, but they still kept busy. Adelaide tended her garden and helped with the grandchildren. Gideon spent his days in the workshop, teaching his craft to his sons and grandsons. On their 20th wedding anniversary, July 9, 1904, the whole family gathered for a celebration. Tables were set up outside laden with food. Children ran everywhere while the adults talked and laughed. Looking around at the crowd, Adelaide marveled at how much had changed since that hot July day in 1884 when she'd stood in the little church and married a wanted man. "Happy anniversary, Mama," Emma said, hugging her mother. 20 years. That's wonderful." "Best 20 years of my life," Adelaide said honestly. That night, after everyone had gone home and the cabin was quiet again, Adelaide and Gideon lay in bed talking about the past 2 decades. "If you could go back," Gideon said, "knowing everything that would happen, all the fear and danger and uncertainty, would you still let me in that night?" Adelaide didn't even have to think about it. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. Because even with all the hard parts, even with all the fear, these have been the happiest years of my life. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Gideon Shaw. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, too. The only good thing, really. Before you, I was just drifting. You gave me purpose, gave me a reason to fight for survival. I owe you everything. You don't owe me anything. We built this life together. Every piece of it we built together." He pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "Here's to 20 more years." "At least," Adelaide agreed, snuggling into his embrace. "At least 20 more." The seasons turned, the children grew, and life continued its gentle pace. There were challenges still, as there always were in farming and ranching. Drought years and good years, cold winters and mild ones. But the Shaw family weathered them all together, supporting each other through the hard times and celebrating together in the good times. In 1908, Adelaide became a great-grandmother when Emma's oldest daughter Grace gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Holding that tiny infant, Adelaide thought about the span of years from that desperate night in 1884 to this moment of joy. She'd lived through so much, overcome so many obstacles, and all of it had been worth it for this. Family, love, continuity. Gideon was 59 now, his hair completely silver, but still strong and capable. They celebrated his 60th birthday in 1909 with another big family gathering, 3 generations of Shaws coming together to honor the patriarch of the family. 25 years since you knocked on my door," Adelaide said to him that evening as they sat on their porch, their customary spot. "Quarter of a century. Best quarter century any man could ask for. I'm a lucky man, Adelaide Shaw. We're both lucky. Lucky we found each other. Lucky we took a chance on love even when it seemed impossible." As the sun set on another day, painting the desert in shades of fire and gold, Adelaide reflected on the story of their lives. It had started with fear and desperation, with a knock on the door in the middle of the night. But it had become a love story, an adventure, a testament to what 2 people could build when they had courage and faith in each other. She thought about that moment when she'd opened her door to a wounded stranger, how her life had changed in that single instant. She'd said bounty hunters don't come this far, believing her isolation was protection. And she'd been right, in a way. The isolation had protected them long enough for love to take root, for a family to be born, for a new life to be established. But more than that, love itself had been their protection. Love had given Gideon the strength to fight for his freedom, had given Adelaide the courage to stand beside him, had created a foundation strong enough to weather any storm. The stars began to appear in the darkening sky, pinpricks of light in the vast darkness, and Adelaide felt at peace. Her father's dream for this land had been realized, and more. Her own dreams, the ones she'd barely dared to dream when she lived here alone, had come true in ways she couldn't have imagined. "What are you thinking about?" Gideon asked, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "Everything. Nothing. The past and the future all mixed together." She squeezed his hand. "Mostly, I'm thinking about how glad I am that you knocked on my door that night." "Glad doesn't even begin to cover it," Gideon said. "That knock changed everything, gave me a life when I thought mine was over, gave me you, gave me our children and grandchildren, gave me a home and a purpose. That was the luckiest moment of my life, seeing your light in the darkness and making the decision to knock." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, hearts intertwined as they had been for 25 years. The desert night settled around them with its familiar sounds and smells. In the distance, they could hear coyotes calling. Closer, the gentle sounds of the cattle settling down for the night, the chickens roosting in their coop, the night birds beginning their songs. This was their life, built from nothing more than courage and hope and love. This was their legacy, written in the lives of their children and grandchildren, in the improved land, in the sturdy buildings they'd constructed, in the community they'd helped build. "I want you to know something," Adelaide said suddenly. "If I had my life to live over, if I could change anything, I wouldn't, not a single moment, because every moment, even the hard ones, led me here, to this porch with you, surrounded by the family we created. This is everything I ever wanted, even when I didn't know I wanted it." Gideon raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Same for me. Every step, every choice, every moment of fear and joy and love, it all led here, and here is perfect." The night deepened around them, but they stayed on the porch a while longer, neither willing to break the peaceful spell of the moment. Eventually, they went inside to their bed, the one they'd shared for 25 years, and fell asleep in each other's arms as they had countless nights before. The years continued their march, bringing both joy and sorrow as years do. In 1912, Daniel and his wife welcomed their 5th child. Emma's oldest son joined the army, the first Shaw to do so. Samuel took over full management of the ranch, allowing Gideon to fully retire to his workshop, where he created beautiful pieces purely for the joy of it. Adelaide's garden remained her pride and joy. Even in her 60s, she spent hours there, coaxing vegetables and flowers from the desert soil. Her granddaughters helped her, learning the skills she'd perfected over decades. She taught them about soil amendments and companion planting, about reading the weather and knowing when to water. She taught them about patience and persistence, about how nothing worthwhile came easy. In 1914, Adelaide and Gideon celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Looking around at the crowd of people who called them Grandma and Grandpa, Adelaide felt overwhelmed with gratitude. 30 years, she said to Gideon that night. "Who would have thought I would have," he said. "From the moment I saw you standing in that doorway with your shotgun, I knew you were someone special, someone worth fighting for. I was so scared that night. Scared to let you in, scared of what might happen. But you did let me in. You took a chance on a desperate stranger. That took tremendous courage, or tremendous foolishness," Adelaide said with a smile. "No, it was wisdom. Some deep part of you recognized some deep part of me, and you knew it would be all right." Adelaide thought about that. Maybe he was right. Maybe in that moment, despite her fear, she'd sensed that this wounded man on her porch was meant to be there. That opening that door would change her life in ways she couldn't imagine but would never regret. "I like that interpretation," she said. "Wisdom sounds better than luck." It was both. Wisdom and luck and fate and love, all of it mixed together to bring us to this moment. They made love that night, slowly and gently. Two people who knew each other's bodies as well as their own, who could communicate with a touch or a glance. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, and Adelaide felt such love for this man that it brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you for every day," she whispered. "Every single day of the past 30 years has been a gift. Thank you for saying yes when I didn't even know I was asking, for seeing past what I was running from to what I could become, for believing in me, in us. I love you more today than I did 30 years ago, and that's saying something because I loved you desperately even then." The next years brought changes, as they always did. The automobile came to Jordan Valley, and while Adelaide and Gideon never learned to drive one, their children did. The old wagon they'd used for trips to town was retired in favor of Samuel's Ford truck. The world was changing, moving faster, and while some of it confused them, they adapted as best they could. In 1918, the Great War finally ended, and they all thanked God that Emma's sons had been too old to be drafted. The Spanish flu swept through, taking so many lives, but the Shaw family's isolation protected them. They stayed on the homestead, avoiding town until the worst had passed. Adelaide turned 70 in 1921, and Gideon threw her a surprise party that brought tears of joy to her eyes. All their children came, all the grandchildren who could make it, and even a few great-grandchildren. The homestead was packed with people, with love, with laughter. "Look at what you built," Gideon told her, gesturing at the crowd. "Look at all these lives that exist because you opened your door to me that night." Adelaide looked and saw it clearly, the web of connection and love radiating out from that single moment of decision. Every person here owed their existence in some way to the choice she'd made to help a wounded stranger instead of turning him away. "We built it," she corrected gently. "Together. Always together." They were slowing down now, both of them feeling their age. Adelaide's hands were twisted with arthritis, making fine needlework difficult. Gideon's back bothered him, and he couldn't work wood for as long as he once had. But they were still sharp mentally, still active, still very much in love. They celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary in 1921, a quiet celebration with just their immediate family. Looking at Gideon across the table, Adelaide saw both the young man who'd knocked on her door and the old man he'd become. She loved both versions equally, loved the whole arc of the life they'd shared. 37 years, she mused. That's longer than I lived before you came into my life. "And we've got years left yet," Gideon said confidently. "We're not done yet, Adelaide, but life had other plans." In the winter of 1922, Gideon caught a cold that turned into pneumonia. Despite Adelaide's careful nursing, despite the doctor they brought from town, he grew steadily weaker. Adelaide sat by his bedside day and night, holding his hand, talking to him, willing him to fight. "Don't you dare leave me," she told him fiercely. "We have more years left, we have more sunsets to watch together." But Gideon shook his head weakly. "Adelaide, my love, I'm tired, so tired. And I've lived a full life, a happy life, all because of you. If this is the end, I'm at peace with it." "I'm not at peace with it. I need you. I've needed you for 38 years. You're the strongest person I know. You survived alone before me and you'll survive after me. But you won't be alone, not really. You have our children and grandchildren, all the family we created together. They'll take care of you." Tears streamed down Adelaide's face. "I don't want them to take care of me, I want you. "I want me too," he said with a weak smile. "But I don't think I get a say in this. Adelaide, listen to me. These 38 years with you have been the greatest gift of my life. Every single day has been a blessing. I was a wanted man living on borrowed time, and you gave me a lifetime. You gave me everything that matters. Love, family, home, purpose. I've been so happy. You made me so happy. You made me happy too, happier than I ever thought possible. Then we've had a good run, haven't we? A love story for the ages. The cowboy with a price on his head and the brave woman who took him in. And it had a happy ending, Adelaide. 38 years of happiness. Most people never get that." The children gathered, called home by telegram. They sat with their father, holding his hands, telling him they loved him, sharing memories. Adelaide never left his side, and on a cold January night in 1923, with his wife and children surrounding him, Gideon Shaw took his last breath. Adelaide felt something break inside her when his hand went slack in hers. This man who'd been her partner, her love, her other half for 38 years was gone. The loss was staggering, overwhelming. She wanted to rage at the unfairness of it, wanted to scream at God for taking him from her. But she also felt grateful. Grateful for every day they'd had, every moment of love, every sunset watched together. They'd beaten the odds spectacularly. A wanted man and a lonely woman had built a life together that most people only dreamed of. They'd created a family, a legacy that would continue long after they were both gone. At Gideon's funeral, held on the homestead he'd loved, Adelaide stood surrounded by their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and spoke about the man she'd loved. 38 years ago, a wounded man knocked on my door in the middle of the night. I almost didn't let him in. I was afraid, alone, cautious. But something made me open that door, and my life changed in that instant. Gideon Shaw was the love of my life, the best man I've ever known. He was kind and strong and patient and brave. He built this homestead with his own 2 hands, raised children who carry his values, lived his life with integrity and love. I will miss him every day for the rest of my life, but I will never regret a single moment we shared. He was my gift, my blessing, and I was privileged to be his wife. They buried him on a small hill overlooking the homestead, where he could eternally watch over the land and family he'd loved. Adelaide visited his grave every day, talking to him, telling him about the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, sharing her thoughts and feelings. The days were hard without him. The bed felt too big, too empty. The porch felt lonely without him beside her. But Adelaide had learned long ago how to survive, and she drew on that strength now. She had too much to live for to give up. Children who needed their mother, grandchildren who needed their grandmother's wisdom, a homestead that still needed tending. She lived 3 more years without Gideon, years filled with love and family but shadowed by the absence of her husband. She was 75 when she started feeling tired all the time, when climbing the porch steps became difficult, when she knew her own time was coming. On a warm spring evening in 1926, 42 years after Gideon had first knocked on her door, Adelaide sat on the porch watching the sunset. All her children were there, called by some unspoken understanding that this might be one of the last sunsets they'd share with their mother. "Tell us the story again, Mama," Emma said. "Tell us about the night Papa came." So Adelaide told them the story one more time, her voice growing fainter but her memory sharp. She remembered every detail, the sound of his knock, the sight of him bleeding and desperate in the lamplight, the choice she'd made to help him despite her fear. She remembered falling in love, getting married, building their life together. She remembered the fear when the bounty hunters came and the joy of Gideon's acquittal. She remembered 38 years of happiness, of partnership, of love. "It was the best decision I ever made," she finished. Opening that door, taking that chance. It gave me everything. A husband I loved, children I adore, a life I'm proud of. Never be afraid to take a chance on love, children. It might be the thing that changes everything. That night, Adelaide went to sleep and didn't wake up. She died peacefully in the bed she'd shared with Gideon for 38 years, in the cabin he'd improved and expanded, on the land they'd made flourish together. They buried her beside Gideon on the hill, and the whole community of Jordan Valley turned out to pay respects. Adelaide Shaw had been a fixture in the area for over 50 years, a strong woman who'd survived alone and thrived in partnership, who'd helped establish a family dynasty that would continue for generations. On her headstone, beside the dates of her birth and death, Daniel had inscribed the words, "She opened the door to love and found a lifetime of happiness." The homestead continued, passed down through the generations. The Shaw family became one of the most prominent in the region, known for their integrity, their craftsmanship, their strong family bonds. And every generation told the story of how it all began. With a cowboy with a price on his head who knocked on a door in the middle of the night, and a brave woman who said bounty hunters don't come this far. It was a love story, an adventure story, a testament to courage and faith and the power of taking a chance. And it had a happy ending, one that lasted not just 38 years but generations, rippling out through time in the lives of all the people Adelaide and Gideon had brought into the world. Their love had built something permanent, something lasting. And every sunset that painted the Oregon high desert in shades of gold and pink, every star that came out in that vast sky, stood as a reminder of the love that had transformed two lonely people into a family, a homestead, a legacy. The end.